Hello, welcome back to the studio. James here from Poseidon Miniature Painting. Now, Death Guard are one of the most iconic armies in the Warhammer 40,000 universe. All of that grime, rust and decay can be a little bit intimidating to tackle. So today I'm going to show you exactly how I achieve this scheme. Step by step, start to finish. Let's get into the video. Okay, let's get stuck into this Death Guard video. So initially I'm just going to set up my wet palette, so I'm just going to add the colours that we're going to use for the blends on the armour. It's handy to have them all ready to go and we can jump in between as and when, or if you make mistakes. So I've got Skaven Blight Dinge as our darkest colour, I've got Dawnstone, I've got one of the Panzer Ace colours which is going to be in between, but I've just set them out the wrong way on the palette, and then our brightest colour is going to be the Celestra Grey. So we're just going to lay those four colours down, water them down a little bit so they're nice and smooth, and then we'll get stuck into the armour. So this is just a couple of models from a large army commission that we've already completed in this colour scheme. There's some nice pictures at the end of the video as well as on our Instagram from this commission. We are just going to use this same scheme and we're now going to work on one of the Terminators. This is a block of 15, so it needs to be fairly quick with some nice blends, but this is army painting as well, so we're not looking for the softest of transitions. We're just going to, we want these to be effective as tabletop pieces essentially, but still look good. So the models have been primed using the Colourforge Standard Grey Matte spray paint, and then I'm going to go in with the Dawnstone. So the Skaven Blight we're just going to use it later for adding shadows into the deepest recesses and sort of fixing mistakes. It's not really used too much, it's more the other three. So I've got my Dawnstone here on the palette. It's watered down nice and thin so it goes on smooth, and as you can see, rather than edge highlighting the armour, we're going with a bit more of a volumetric technique. So I'm trying to pick out the areas where the light would hit the armour. This is going to cover most of it, to be honest. We're just leaving some of that grey Skaven Blight colour in the darker, deeper recesses. So I'm just going to work my way around the model, picking out the areas. Don't worry about the coverage, it's going to be thin and transparent at this point. Let it fully dry before you start moving it around, or you're going to create texture, and we'll just keep working our way around, repeating a few layers until we're happy with the transparency. If you haven't really painted models in this way and you tend to stick with more of a classic box art G-dub edge highlighting technique, I recommend you give it a go. Volumetric is pretty fun. You can still add some edge highlights as well, which will make it look amazing later on, but it gives you some nice interest and volumes to the armour rather than being like that flat colour and then going with a chunky edge highlight and a thin edge highlight. This is going to make it look a lot more interesting from all angles on the tabletop. You can see here with the shoulder pad, we kind of want to keep it scratchy. We want smooth coverage but scratchy effects, if that makes sense. I'm not looking to create texture by messing the paint around too much, but I don't want it to be, I'm not looking for perfectly round, symmetrical sort of blends. I'm just making it scratchy, keeping it interesting. Also, it is Death Guard, so I kind of want it to be a little bit more textured, like the armour wouldn't be immaculate on Death Guard Terminators. I'm just going to keep repeating the process and building up those layers. I've sped it up a little bit. I wanted to leave all the footage in here because I don't want it to jump to the next colour and you might be thinking, how did we get to there? So I've left it here just sped up so you can see getting the armour right is probably one of the most important steps, and then you can paint the details in your own techniques however you want, or you can follow this full recipe. But I'm just going to leave you the rest of the footage, getting the Dawnstone layers built up and some nice coverage. So as you can see, I'm about happy now with the coverage of the Dawnstone. We've got some nice transitions between the dark and the light. Don't worry too much about blending those so they're really smooth. Sometimes quite strong jumps from colour can be more eye-catching. Next up, we are going to move on to the Panzer Ace 338 is the colour here. As you can see, it's supposed to be on the spectrum of the colours it would be next to the Dawnstone, but I just put them down the wrong way around. So this has got kind of quite a strong green tone to it, especially in the bottle, but then once it dries it's actually really quite grey, and it just leaves a nice sort of tint with that teal colour. So we're going to do the same thing as we did with the Dawnstone. Again, it's really watered down and really thin on the palette there, and I'm going to just again do the same things, pick out the same volumes that we've already identified with the Dawnstone, except smaller areas, leaving a little bit of that Dawnstone showing through, so we've got some nice transitions and picking up some nice edge highlights as we go. Also, something I quite like to consider when we are painting like this with the volumetric highlights is considering where the light would hit the model. We're looking for effect rather than realism, but at the same time, for example, the brightest highlight on his shoulder pad, which is right at the top of the model, closest to our light source essentially, would naturally be brighter than his toe of his boot that's at the bottom of the model. So even though we're going to highlight everything up, we're going to leave some areas, you know, further down the spectrum. We're not going to go as bright with the highlights, rather than have everything reach the exact same colour for the peak of the highlight. So just consider that. It's not too much with this colour, but again with the Dawnstone, the Celestial Grey, sorry, when we're going with that, we kind of want to consider placement. So it sort of draws your eye to the top of the model where the brighter points naturally are. And then when it's like this as an army project, you look at the unit and the top half sort of really glows and it's really effective. So again, you can see we're just working our way around the model here, picking out some edge highlights and some of the volumetric highlights. I've sped this up again. Again, wanted to leave the full footage in so you can see the process and you can jump through as and when you need it. So I'll leave you to kind of finish the Panzer Ace. There we are, so we've now got two of our highlight colours in there and he's starting to look pretty effective. Again, you could leave it there and it'd be pretty good as a gaming piece. Next up, we are going in with our Celestial Grey just to push it a little bit further. So this, as I've said earlier, I'm going to thin it down and I'm going to pick out the volumetric highlights. Then I'm going to use it a little bit thicker, a little bit more out of the bottle for our edge highlights and pick out the corners and edges and trim. You can still do that with it thinned down, just be careful with the run. Also with the Death Guard armour, you can see those pit marks and holes, and I'm going to edge highlight scratchy sort of highlights around those because we're going to fill those later with some sort of rust and decay type details. So if it's got a nice bright edge highlight around those holes, it's going to give us a really good contrast between the dark and light and be eye-catching on the model. As you can see, I like to turn the model around in my hand, upside down, sideways, every which way, just to get those highlights. Again, this is optional. You don't have to push it this far if you don't want to, or at the same time, if you really want those, you know, you want kind of nice smooth blends, you could spend a lot more time sort of going back through your colours and getting soft transitions and glazing it over. But in terms of this being an army and a commission piece and a gaming piece, essentially, this is more than we need, where it's going to look great and it's going to be a good piece on the tabletop. So the paint on the palette now, as I've got it on the wet palette, I kind of add water to one side of it and keep the other side a bit more neat. So I'm now using that, and I'm just using the side of the brush. I'm just going to work my way around and pick out some of those edge highlights and rivets and things like that. Main things to concentrate on realistically are going to be your shoulder pads. That nice piece of trim that's in front of the helmet's really good because we can put a nice sort of bounce light on the front of there and it's really effective. And then a nice crisp edge highlight. And again, there's some nice shaped pieces on the top of his backpack armor type area that we can pick out as we go. I'm also just adding some of the volumetric highlights, as you can see here. So we've picked out the edges. We don't want to ruin that now, so keep this nice and small so it doesn't cover the whole armor and ruin the effect. Again, you can see there the coverage isn't great, which is fine for what we're looking for here. Just let it dry, add another layer and keep going kind of that way around. You can always add more, but you can't take it away. This is a great little piece of the armor to demonstrate that volumetric on. So we've got a tube, essentially. Imagine if it was like a Pringles tube laid on its side, right? That's the shape of this piece. So it's great in terms of where the light would hit it. It's just going to sort of roll across the top there. So I'm doing little strokes, pulling the brush back and forward. And when I lift the brush, I'm trying to sort of lift it right in the middle. So where we get that little damp patch spill of paint that's left on the brush, it's in the middle, and when it dries you're not going to be able to see it. So yeah, it's really nice to have those shapes there, and it makes it quite effective. Again, I left all this footage in. I know there's not as much voiceover, but I didn't want to cut it all out and you miss some of the steps or transitions or how to achieve some of the effects. So our Skaven Blight Dinge, as I said, this is only really going to be used to fix mistakes and bring in those shadows because it's a good match to the standard grey. As you can see there above his foot, there's that kind of overhang of the armour, which had got sort of watermarked with Celestra Grey, so I've just fixed that. Any of the joints and things where you've kind of gone a bit too much with your highlight colour, then we're just going to fix that with the Skaven Blight Dinge. It's a good match, and it'll get those transitions back in place with the shadows. Again, you could leave it alone at this point. I've come back in with my Celestra Grey. I kind of like to just play around with the blends, you know, until I'm happy with it. I don't have an exact sort of recipe of where I want to leave it alone. Yeah, it's personal preference. But I just kind of have another look around the model, pick out some more highlights where I think I can get away with it. I've let the initial ones dry because they do dull down a little bit. It can look quite bright, and it might look like you've pushed the highlights a little bit too much. And then once it dries, you can't help but get the brush back in there and add a few more transitions. So again, I'm just going to speed this up so you can see the complete process of the armour realistically, and me messing around with Celestra Grey. So you can always skip ahead to the next colour, or you can watch the full thing if you want to see how we build up the strength of the colour. So I'm pretty happy now with the colour we've built up. Obviously the camera light is quite bright, so it makes the highlights look a bit stronger than they are. You can see when we move the model away a little bit more, it's not quite as strong as that. So I have, again, I can't help but tweak with it. I've gone back to my Panzer Ace. So this is watered down, probably 2 to 3 parts water to 1 part paint. So it's like a glaze essentially now. And I'm just going to work over those transition areas. So between the Panzer Ace and the Celestra Grey, I'm just going to sort of wash over the top of it, if you will, but make sure you're not puddling it or leaving spills or stains. And then again, lift the brush off the model somewhere in between of where the colour meets, so you don't leave an obvious mark. This is just fine tuning really, and playing around with the effects until you're happy with, you know, the feel of the colour. I wanted to add a little bit more green tones back in, so that's why I've gone in with the Panzer Ace. Yeah, and I'll just leave this footage in so you can see for the armour the full process to get the finished result, rather than it just jump and be a dramatic change in the picture from where we've left it. Again, you can just see there, just softening those transitions. I'm not trying to get rid of the shadows. I actually quite like the strong dark to light contrast. It's more between the mid-tones and the brightest colour. I want to smooth that out so it looks, yeah, it just gives it a nice soft finish. Next up, we've got the boring bit for all models, but it really does make a difference, especially for those metallics and things like that. Pick out all the details, any black that's your favourite. I pretty much stick to AK Black or Vallejo 950. This is the Vallejo Black. We don't need absolute coverage, like if it's a little bit transparent it's fine because we're going to go over the top with metallics, but yeah, just pick out everything, work your way around the model with black and pick out all those details. Okay, there we go, so the arm is basically complete. We've blocked in the details. Now we're going to get onto some fun stuff. So we're going to do metallics, we're going to do weathering, we're going to do some glow effects. So next I've used AK Burnt Tin here. This is the base colour I'm going to use for the metallics, golds. So again, just work your way around the model. I'm not really precious on this. I just pick areas that I think will look cool. Obviously the trim of the armour classically is like the Balthazar Gold with Death Guard, so this is quite a similar colour, but Balthazar Gold has got terrible coverage, and when you leave it in the pot and then open it again, it's like all separated and clumpy and weird colours. So yeah, if you're wanting a good substitute, this is pretty much up there really for that kind of tone. So there we go, I've picked out all the details that I've decided are going to be gold on this model, and then we're going to fill out our silvers. So I've gone with black metal. It's got a nice deep colour to it. You can still add a wash over it and make it a little bit darker, but it's good to highlight up. It's got really good coverage, yeah, and it's like a nice deep metallic, almost a little bit of a bluey tone to it in some light, and it goes on really well. So again, just pick out all the details you would like to be silver metallics. As you can see on the left leg that's forward, there's like a drip there, which would normally be like a slime drip. I don't really like those being all bright colours on the model, so we're going to do something a little bit different with that. I'm now going to highlight up our gold. So we're starting with Runelord Brass, and we're going with like scratchy highlights. So any sharp edges, we're going to pick out with the side of the brush. Any smooth panels, we're going to kind of go with like a scratchy volumetric. If you're struggling with where to put it, try and match it up with the armour. Look at the panel above and the panel below and where you've sort of placed those highlights and match it up really. and just try and leave some of that burnt tin in the shadows. So when you've got pointy shapes like this, like on the end of the handle of the mace, it's really good because we've got two obvious triangle sides that face upwards. So I'm just going to fully colour those in the brighter colour, and then we'll edge highlight them when we go one higher. But it makes it really strong contrast between the dark and the light. We don't always have to, you know, blend through. It's not realistic. It's kind of where the light would hit it. So just work your way around, have a little bit of fun with it. Again, just the areas that you think are going to look good, really. It doesn't have to make that much sense in terms of the light sourcing. It's a gaming piece and we want it to look effective. Again, just going to speed this up so you can see the process. Things like the exhaust at the top of his backpack, you can almost like just dry brush across it because of the circular shape. Think about, as we said, we're like a Pringles tube, we want almost that circular shape onto it, so we can literally just dry brush it across. Again, optional extra, I've gone with Canoptic Alloy. This is actually a brilliant colour. I've started using it recently and find more and more reasons to add it into projects, but it gives you a nice bright finish but keeps the metallic colour to it. So again, I'm just going to go with a little bit of an extreme highlight, pick out the edges that are more prominent, and then towards the very front of those volumes we've created, we're just going to make it a nice bright edge. It's good as well for like the blade part on his mace. It makes it look sharper and shinier, like the edge has been used more than the rest where the grime would sit in the recesses. So for our silver metallics, I do want these a little bit grimier. So I'm going to go in with some Adrax Earthshade again. You could use oil washes and it'd look great. This is kind of the colour profiles we're using for this project though. So I'm going to stick with the Adrax, give it a good wash, and then we can highlight it. While this is drying, we are also going to place in some of the other colours for the skin and for the green glowy smoke effect from his mace. You can use any kind of method that you like for the tentacles. Some people like to go really grimy and purple and things like that. With this force, I kind of want to go a little bit more realistic. I don't really personally like the cartoony, you know, where everything's really purple and with like loads of bright boils and pus and all that kind of thing. So I'm going a little bit more realistic. We've gone with the Bugman Glow base colour for the skin, and we are going with Warpstone Glow for the smoke that's coming out of his mace. So again, while the Adrax is drying, I'm going to just work on these little details. I've got AK Light Flesh here, and I'm just going to pick out the recesses and highlights, and as it goes towards the tip of the tentacle, I've just put some stripes in to give it a little bit of texture and shape to it. But yeah, just work your way around, little thin layers, and just highlight probably the majority of it really, and just leave the Bugmans underneath in some of the recesses. We'll give this a little sort of faint touch of a wash later. You could go harder if you wanted with a much brighter or much more corrupted purple bruised looking colour. Just personal preference on that one. Okay, for our final highlight on the skin, we've gone with AK Highlight Flesh. Just pick out the tip, pick out a few of those little stripe recesses, textures we've created, and a few of the weird warp bump boils. Yeah, you can go a little bit brighter here because we are going to give it a little wash just to tie it all together just shortly. And finally, I've gone with Dreadful Visage. This is a contrast paint from GW. It's got really poor coverage and it's super watery even when you shake it down. So yeah, I wouldn't use it necessarily for an army project, but it's great for the effect we're looking for here as a glaze essentially ready to go. Next up, we're going to work on the smoke effect from the mace. Next colour we're going with is Moot Green. Again, not great coverage, but that's good for what we're looking for. Thin down, glaze a few layers, and just pick out the sort of, yeah, you want to make it look more effective and bright really. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to worry too much about the volumes, just pick out the areas that you want to highlight. On my wet palette, I've now mixed the Moot Green 1-to-1 with Ice Yellow, and we're going to repeat the process. Again, make sure you leave plenty of the Moot Green showing underneath, and we're just going to glaze this for our brightest highlight. So we're getting a nice brightness to this, but we have lost a little bit of the saturation of the colour. So I've now mixed in 1-to-1 Moot Green with 1-to-1 Uriel Yellow. This will look quite bright when you put it on, but it will dry, you know, a little bit more subtle on there. So yeah, this is going to give a nice brighter contrast and bring a little bit more colour to it. It was getting a little bit pale, a little bit desaturated, so we're going with the Uriel Yellow. Still leave the tips nice and bright highlight. We're kind of using this just to sort of blend those mid-tones in and just play around with it, have a little bit of fun until you get the effect you are looking for. Next up, we're going to tackle the rust effect. So on other videos you'll have seen me use things like oil washes, but here I'm going to start with AK Dark Rust. Thin it down on your palette and then just have fun with this. Put it into the recesses, those little weird slime drips that you could paint in bright green and things like that. I don't really like them on the model, but they are sculpted, so I'm just going to paint over them as like rust and it'll blend it in. It's quite good to go around the edges of all the trim and the rivets, again watered down. You should be able to just tap it with the brush and the capillary action will drag it into the recess or drag it around the rivet. And then we're just going to add some random patches of rust effect. Bear in mind, you can make these a little bit bigger because our next colour is going to go inside of these to create a brighter rust effect, essentially. This also is really effective on the metallics, you know, the silvers and things like that. Just water it down and really slap it in there, just getting in amongst all the joints and chains and links and things like that, and it makes it really effective. Next up, we are going to use AK Light Rust. So we just want to pick out sort of the center of the rust patches, the deepest parts. Imagine where the water would sit in the armour, essentially, around the edges and the potholes and things like that, where it would have corroded a bit more. And we're going to just kind of water this down and then place it in position like you would with an oil wash, and then we'll just leave it to dry and it'll be quite effective for our rust effect. Okay, the final effect we're going to do is a verdigris effect on the gold details. So like you would with a copper pipe, where it would start to corrode and get that green, blue, weird crust on it, we're going to do something like that. It's quite a vibrant scheme, as you can tell, but it'll look effective on the tabletop. So I've got Armour blue here. Really water it down, like 3 parts water, 1 part paint, and do the same thing that you did with the rust. We did the rust on the armour and the metallics. We're going to do this just on the gold effects and the coppers and things like that. So just place it into the deepest recesses and let it pool, let it do the work for you really. And finally, I'm going to use Vallejo blue green. So this is a really light blue color. If you don't want to have all of these paints, you could just add a white or a silver gray or something, you know, to the existing color. I've got these, so it's just easy to do. And same again, water it down, and then just inside of those Armour blue areas, try not to cover it completely. We want to leave that transition, and it will give you a nice effect. So I am aware the only thing we've missed off this model is things like bone effects and straps. Don't worry, they will be on another video. But with those, we are finished with our model. As you can see, this is going to look great across the army, and here are some examples of the force we completed as an army commission. Hope you enjoyed the video, and see you on the next one.